2019. If we could please stand for the opening prayer and acknowledgement. Thank you. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. CM2, recording webcasting the meeting. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair. I have not received any at this point. Mr Zachnich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This advice regarding disclosure of political donations and requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. The Act under Section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre, must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Apologies. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillor Doxey and Glacken and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. No mayoral minutes. CM5. Action plans. CM6. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to move that, or was you?
I was attempting to second the previous moving of the apologies.
Right, I didn't want to move that one?
No, I would have put my line on if I wanted to move that one, Mr
Well,
Mayor.
it was on. Thank you. Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move the recommendation as to motion that the following action plan be received and noted. 1 action is complete for noting only. 2 actions awaiting a response from external parties. 3 actions in progress, and 4 long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderven, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There being no questions or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM7, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting on the 27th of May 2019. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes of the Council meeting held on Monday 27th of May 2019 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you.
There being no questions or debate, I'm happy to put the minutes. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. There are no reports from community forums, no notice of motion, no presentation of deputation. CM11, reports of minutes of committees and working parties, minutes of the Hume Zone Bushfire Management Committee. Thank you. Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendation of the motion that Council receive, note and accept the minutes recommendations of the Hume Zone Bushfire Management Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 17 April 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderven, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Documents for sealing, 12.1. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the council authorise that seal to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400, the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and the Council Seal and Management of Legal Documents and Advice Procedure. A. AlburyCity lease, take-up of lease option to the Secretary of the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, Lot 24, Albury Airport, commencing 1st July 2019 for 5 years, FIL 13/01493.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you just speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM13 Officers' Reports for consideration. 13.1 the draft 2019-20 operational plan and 4-year delivery program. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council...
Phil, do you want me to fill your glass?
Halfway through, yes. A, acknowledge the submissions received during the public exhibition period. B, amend the exhibited draft 2019-20 operational plan, draft 2019-2023 4-year delivery program and draft 2019-2029 long-term financial plan by bringing forward the 1.25 million Albury Regional Skate Park constructed budget from year 4 to year 2 and the addition of the Lavington cycle loop design during the 2019-2020 financial year. C, adopt the amended draft 2019-2020 operational plan, amended draft 2019-2023 4-year delivery program and amended draft 2019-2029 long-term financial plan. D, vote the expenditure set out in the amended operational plan for the 2019-2020 year. E, make each rate and charge for the 2019-20 year in accordance with the exhibited 2019-2020 Statement of Revenue Policy. And F, make each fee and charge for the 2019-2020 year in accordance with the exhibited 2019-2020 Schedule of Fees and Charges. Section 494 of the Local Government Act 1993 requires council to make and levy ordinary rates on all rateable land in its area for the year 2019-2020. Section 497B of the Local Government Act 1993 provides a method of structure for council rates. The council ordinary rate has a base amount to which an ad valorem amount is added. The base amount is in accordance with sections 499 and 500 of the Local Government Act 1993.
That will do it. The General Manager informs me, so thank you, Councillor Thurley.
I wasn't going to read the rest.
Go into the tables. You'd be under the table. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Excellent work. Councillor Thurley, I have a question from a councillor. Did you wish to open debate?
I'll take the question, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question's through to the relevant member of staff, please. I was pleased to note the addition of the design of the Lavington bike loop at this stage of the budget process, given that the proposed Wagga Road beautification project doesn't have any provision for cyclists in it. My question is that if we're designing during 2019-20, there's actually not a provision for construction following that. So I'm wondering when construction is planned.
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we can certainly include an allocation to budget in year 2 for the construction. We're undertaking design as per the recommendation in 1920, but we can certainly include an allocation. I suggest, without having designs complete at this stage, it would be in the order of 100,000, similar to what we have for the Albury CBD. And if councillors wish to have that allocated now in year 2, we could revise that when budgets come around this time next year. Alternatively, once designs are complete, we could just bring it in as a new item next year, whichever suited the council.
Councillor Con, follow up.
Given the response to that question, I'm inclined to move a minor amendment to that dot point in B to say the addition of the Lavington Cycle Loop design during the 2019-20 financial year and construction in 2020-2021.
So did you wish to ask the mover, Councillor Thurley?
I don't have any problem with that.
Councillor Stutchbury?
I have no problem with that.
Excellent. Okay, that's been added to the motion. Councillor Condi, do we have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Councillor Thurley, have a speaker against.
There's been an amendment made with the approval of the mover. I don't wish to vote for that amendment. So where do we go now?
So you want the amendment to go through the
So
process?
if I was to now
Yeah.
want to vote against the amendment,
You have to knock it
I would
all
have
out.
to vote against the whole of that budget.
Happy to deal with it separately, Councillor Vanderman. There's no issue with that. So do I have a seconder for Councillor Con's amendment that the cycle loop be included? Councillor Cameron.
My understanding of the standing orders is that when a amendment is proposed, and when that amendment is acceptable to the mover and the seconder, that proposition then becomes the motion. Therefore, it is not in order for you to declare that we are going to deal with it separately.
Thank you.
If people are not happy with the motion as it now stands,
They
then
seek
they're free
amend
to
it.
oppose it or amend it in the normal way.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman. I'll get Councillor Thurley to open the debate on this item and you can propose or foreshadow a further amendment. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I went to several of the public presentations of the budget and there was some interest. It varied from time to time. And I read the submission of the public submissions. There was, and we've dealt with one of them here in terms of the regional skate park. One submission wished that to be brought forward and we have responded to that submission. There was another submission about council borrowings. The submitter had rightly indicated that we have surplus funds, but most of those surplus funds are held in the water and wastewater funds and they are both quarantined from general funds. The general fund itself is healthy, but it does not have significant amounts of money surplus in it. So the only way that we could change that is by paying a dividend from the water fund to the general fund, and that's something that council should always keep their eye on. However, council borrows money so that people, ratepayers of today, are not paying for all of the things that are occurring. The expenditure is spread over the longer term and future ratepayers will pay for the services we get. So overall, this is a good result. Surplus in all funds. The surplus in the the sewer fund is high, but then there's huge capital projects coming up in that area and we need that money there. So I commend this budget to councillors and to the community.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There are no speakers against this point. Yes, we have. Councillor Vanderman.
Well, I'm forced to speak against this particular motion and I foreshadow an amendment should this motion fail to get up. But I'm really, I'm concerned about the amendment that's been put forward on two bases. One, we've had probably 6 or 7 weeks of this being put and looked at by our community, by our councils, and at the last minute we're asked to vote for some design money and also construction money for a project that is, at best, marginal for our community. I mean, you only have to go down and stand in either Swift Street or the new parts of Smollett Street, where there are also the Copenhagen lanes for cyclists, to see that they are not used by anybody. And I don't know why we need to go through this sham of putting a cycle loop through Lavington CBD that nobody is going to use. I don't have an issue with cycle trails around our city. There's a great cycle track from Thaguna down alongside the freeway. There's cycle trails all over our city. But the ones that aren't being used are the ones we're proposing to waste more money on in the Lavington CBD. Nobody uses them. So why are we persisting in putting these cycle loops? It's obviously dangerous, otherwise people would use them. So I'm dead set against having either the design or the construction money put in here without proper discussion with my fellow councillors during a normal budget process, and not having this put in at the last minute. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start off by speaking about the budget as a whole, because this debate shouldn't only be about the cycle loop. Look, it was great that 186 people attended the community engagement sessions, and we had 6 formal submissions. And it's good to see that those submissions are actually taken on board, as demonstrated by the amendment for the skate park. So I wanted to thank the members of the community that actually made the effort to come to those sessions and give us their feedback, which is really appreciated. A lot of work has already gone into this budget before it was put on public exhibition, and I think the fact that we argue about minutiae at the last minute demonstrates that the budget is actually, mostly agreed on consensus, and it's a testament to the work that's already gone in. I will briefly speak about the bike loop because there's been some opposition. Look, regretfully, Councillor Vandervan didn't actually attend the workshop that was recently held where the Lavington bike loop was presented to us by staff. This was in the context of the Wagga Road beautification project going ahead without any cycle lanes, therefore leaving not many safe cycle routes for residents in Lavington. Staff have designed an alternate route for cyclists so that they don't need to take the danger of taking Wagga Road, which I commend. This is really about road safety. It's safer for both cyclists and drivers to not have to share the same lane. So I was very pleased that the staff had actually put the effort into design this loop. We need to have it in the plan to follow up with detailed design and construction, or that effort will have gone to waste. So I'm happy to have that now included. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have a speaker against, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo the comments and the position of Mr. Councillor Vandervan. It's not ideal, I think, to add amendments at the last moment to the budget. The budget process is necessarily very extensive and exhaustive, and rightly so. It's poor governance, in my view, to be slipping things on the night in this fashion. I support, like I discern that Councillor Vandervan does, I support the original text of the motion for the budget, and if Councillor Vandervan cared to move his amendment that he's foreshadowed, I'd certainly second it.
Thank you. I have another speaker against, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo the thoughts of Councillor Vandervan, especially the lanes in the CBD. I was out on the weekend and didn't see one person riding on any of those bike lanes at all. It's to sort of go a bit off track. The CBD of Albury with those bike lanes is becoming cluttered. We've foregone valuable parking space for people. And I also agree with Councillor Cameron that last minute inclusions, certainly on this contentious issue, I'm not for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Just one question, being I wasn't here for that workshop either, Mr. Ferris. The lanes proposed are the same as the CBD lanes, the Copenhagen lanes that are referenced by, are they called Copenhagen lanes? Is that right, or Mr. Ferris?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. They would simply extending our bike path network that we have throughout our city, not just in our CBDs. So while in the CBD proper of Wagga Road, we may have them painted and designated like that, we're still yet to go through that design process, but primarily leading up to that though would be similar to what we have through most of our city, where we have designated bike paths for people to get to the CBD. So in particular with the Wagga Road, proposal that was presented at the workshop. Given it's 4 lanes and having a large median to have vegetation and trees, etc. in the middle of it, we never had the available space to have designated bike lanes in the Wagga Road section, similar to stage 1 that was completed a few years ago. So the plan there is we already have a connection from Union Road and under the rail line up through Moore Street into the Lavington CBD. Heading from the north back, we could go down Barlow Street and then use Griffith Road, the extent of Griffith Road as our on-road bike path, getting us to the CBD of Lavington once again.
So the model would be not dissimilar to what's in Smollett Street?
Within that CBD precinct, we could have similar to what's in Swiss Street, yes.
Okay, thank you. There being no further speakers against or for, questions? Councillor Thurley?
A question about the process here. Obviously, I don't want a second chance at this. I'm in favour of the budget as it was originally printed, which is not including the construction during the 2021 financial year. So if you pull that out, surely that's going to be... That's the contentious issue, that the construction is being proposed in this budget as the last minute item. And that's all we're all concerned about.
Yeah, well, your foreshadow motion becomes that motion with exception of that particular section.
So we have to vote down the budget because of this whole issue about one additional sentence. We have to vote the budget down in the first place and then amend it to change that wording with the rest of it. So it just seems a clunky process around this.
So
I'm just disappointed that's the process we have to go through.
Mr Zaknich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr Mayor. So the situation we have is there is a motion that's been moved and seconded that had a slight amendment with the agreement in the mover and seconder, which includes the construction provision as per the screen. The options available are for Councillor Vandervan to move an amendment to that motion, which essentially proposes an amendment which excludes the construction component. And if he's able to gain a seconder, then that amendment, which is essentially the original recommendation, would be then debated, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I so move that amendment, Mr Mayor,
Thank you.
to take out those wording around the construction during the 2021 financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron.
As I foreshadowed, I'm happy to second that amendment.
Councillor Vandervan.
I think I've said everything I need to say regarding that amendment. Yeah, look, it's unfortunate that there's a few councillors not able to be at that design for that cycle loop, but I still think that as a principle, adding the construction so quickly when we don't even know how much the cycle design loop is going to cost and how much then the construction is going to cost, because you know, those things haven't been finalised yet. I just think it'd be prudent to wait till the design is finalised before we decide to add it to our budget.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. There appears to be no further speakers for or against your amendment. Did you wish to close it, or is you said adequate at this point?
Happy to just leave it as it is, yeah.
So we're voting for your amendment with exception of the construction of the cycle path with the lost cycle loop during the 2021 financial year. So do we want to amend that now, or so we understand what we're voting for? Yeah. So that's the amendment, Councillor Vandervan. So I'm happy, there have been no further speakers for or against the amendment. I'm happy to put the amendment at this point as a motion. All those in favour? Those against? The amendment and motion is carried. Now it becomes a motion, so I'm happy to put that motion again. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Thank you, councillors. 13.2, the councillor and mayoral fees for 1920. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the report on councillor and mayoral fees for 2019-2020. B, increase the councillor fee to $20,280 and mayoral additional fee to $44,250 for the 2019-20 period in accordance with the maximum level for regional rural councils. And C, increase the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee external member fee to $5,018.64 and the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee external chairperson's annual fee to $6,969.75 for the 2019-2020 period.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Cameron.
I'd like to second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to speak to that?
Briefly to comment that this is a procedural matter. Ever since I've been on council, the Local Government Remuneration Tribunal makes a recommendation and this council simply accepts that recommendation without alteration.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, wishing to
Thank you,
speak
Mr Mayor.
for.
Thank you. I have only two observations. One is that the category which we're bound to by the process is woefully out of kilter for the responsibility and the size of this council's operations, and particularly sewerage and water, which other comparable councils in the same group, such as Wagga and Dubbo, I believe, are not, don't have those responsibilities. Being on the border, we also are starkly in contrast with Wodonga, which is a smaller city with a much smaller economy and budget and responsibilities, who are remunerated at a much higher rate. I don't believe there's anybody on council who makes a profit by being on council. We all forego other earnings or earnings in our particular fields of endeavour in order to be on council. And the councillor allowance is a small, essentially token payment designed to partly compensate the expense and foregone revenue that councillors would otherwise receive. Anybody who thinks that they're going to turn a profit by going on to council, I'd invite them to run and hopefully get elected, and they'll soon discover that what I'm saying is correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Review of Model Code of Conduct 13.3. Thank you. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A adopt the draft AlburyCity Code of Conduct with the following amendment, which is replace Part 8.20A with you must not use social media to post comments, photos, sound recordings or other information that contravenes the general conduct obligations described in Part 3 of the Code of Conduct. B, that to adopt the draft procedures for the administration of the Code of Conduct, and C, endorse the implementation actions as outlined in this report.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I'll just wait for that to appear on the screen before I go to seconder. Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Con, I have a question. Do you wish me to take the question first? Sure. Councillor Vandervan.
I just want to find out from Councillor Con, through you, whether the wording as that she's proposed with the change covers all social media. That there's some strange letters on that first line. Anyway, replace.
Councillor Con.
So, hey?
Hey, keep going.
So is that? So I have various social media accounts. I have personal accounts, and I have accounts that I run for other organisations, plus my council, if you like, social media. So does it cover everything that I do on social media?
My reading of the wording that I've put is that you can't, as a person, can't use social media to do anything that breaches Part 3 of the code. To be honest, my personal reading of Part 3 of the code would be that implicitly it would include social media anyway. There was a workshop where we discussed this at some stage, and there seemed to be a mood that councillors wanted that to be explicitly listed in the code, which is what the Part 8.20A is adding.
So under the 8.20A, Councillor Vandep says you must not use social media to post comments, photos, sound recordings or other information that, and it follows all the way down to H in the amendment proposed by the staff. Councillor Cameron, question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff. Can the staff confirm that under the proposed code of conduct and that the same ambit would apply that applies in the current code of conduct? That is, that when you're performing your official duties as a councillor, the code has effect, but not in other areas of your life. That the code only has effect when you're performing official duties as a councillor.
Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr Mayor. That is correct in terms of the code interpretation. As we've discussed previously, though, those areas can be grey at times.
Yes, Councillor Con, did you wish to open debate on this motion? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Look, the vast majority of the new code of conduct is the model code of conduct that has been sent from the state government, so there's very little to debate. I did email through my amendment to councillors in advance, but for those of you that hadn't seen the proposed amendment, I'm happy to explain. There was a previous discussion where there was a desire to have social media explicitly mentioned in the code, but the proposed draft from the staff had parts A to H that specifically defined behaviour that would be prohibited on social media. It seems bizarre to me to duplicate that rather than just say the same provisions apply to all activities, including social media. In particular, there was a proposed clause that I had issue with, which was not to post anything that has the potential to have a negative impact on your working relationships within the council or with external parties. And I think that was overly onerous. Quite bizarre that would impact social media but not our other interactions with the public as councillors. It makes a lot of sense to me that it should be the identical provisions as per Part 3 of the code from the Office of Local Government across all means of communication, and that's what I'm proposing.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Speaker against, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak against this. We are compelled by law to adopt the model code of the model code as a minimum. We can make additions to that, as the draft document suggests we do, as long as they're not inconsistent with the published or the model code. I think that the code of conduct is unfair in the way that it operates. It puts all the onus on councillors. It puts no obligation on any other person who is not a councillor. It does not have parallels at the state or federal government levels, and it is often used, and I have been subjected to this, as a form of political attack where people will make vexatious and repeated and frivolous codes of conduct in an effort to influence an agenda that council may or may not be involved in. It is bad regulation, it is bad law, and we should only cooperate with it to the degree that we're legally obliged to. Consequently, I intend to move an amendment, which I'll do now, with your indulgence, Mr Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Cameron.
And my amendment is to the motion: the council simply adopt the model code of conduct with no alterations or additions other than those that are legally compelled to be adopted.
Can you provide that amendment to the staff? Thanks, Councillor Cameron, so I can get it up on the board. We need a seconder. They
Well,
need
I'll need a
to be able to see
seconder
what they're
first, won't I?
seconding. Well, they need to be able to see what they're seconding.
All right. So how would you like me to do this? Dictated or?
Dictate it, would be nice.
To the degree that we're legally compelled to.
Yeah, which is the model code
Durhamine? Durhamine. Can I put- Meanwhile, experience. Yes.
The issue with this is,
Well, let me act on her anger then.
clearly,
Tomorrow's Wednesday, I'll have to zero my rifle at the range. Probably Saturday. Oh, look, if you're keen, you do it at night time. But I'd probably whistle them and try to track them through the day. They haven't been shot in the recent times. They'll come to the whistle. They think it's a wounded rabbit.
yeah.
Good, isn't it?
How are we going there?
Embellishments and addendums. No, I think that is succinct and very to the point.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury?
Second that amendment, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to reopen debate on that amendment?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There are no questions or further debate. We shall vote in relation to this amendment. All those in favour? Those against? The amendment is 1. Now it becomes in motion. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 13.4, Albury-Wodonga Aquatic Facilities Reference Group. Thank you. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just having an IT problem here. I'll swiftly get on top of it. And I would like to move that council establish a cross-border aquatics facility advisory committee. Dot point. Commence the process to appoint new members of a cross-border aquatics facility advisory committee. Second dot point. This will include Albury Council representation, but will not include council representation from the City of Wodonga. Third dot point. Provide AlburyCity strategic feedback into the Two Cities, One Community action plan for the investigation into the feasibility of a regional indoor aquatic facility. Fourth dot point. Change the advisory committee name to the Albury Aquatic Facilities Advisory Committee to reflect the composition of its members. And for the ease of staff, this can be found in option 1 in the report, which could be cut and pasted, I imagine.
Yeah, just stand by.
Cut and paste. Go and do it anyway and try and shame Wodonga into participating.
So just to be clear, councillors, we're talking about option 1 within the report, so if you wish to reference it and understand why it wasn't originally recommended and get a balance of where the reference point is.
Beg your pardon?
option 1 is your motion
Yes.
in the report. I'm just referencing where that has been extrapolated from, Councillor Cameron, while we're getting it up on the screen.
Well, is there some, with respect, Mr Mayor, is there some sort of commentary going on?
Just telling them where it's to be found,
Thank you.
Councillor Cameron. Okay, Councillor Cameron, that to your liking?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Needing a seconder for that motion. Thanks, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Cameron, do you wish to open debate on your
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
motion?
This was the original intention when I moved the motion that council adopted that gave when this motion had its genesis in. Sadly, the City of Wodonga has elected not to participate. That's lamentable and strange to me. A democratically elected group of people who think they can't talk to the people who, or shouldn't consult with the people who elected them, is not going to prosper in my view, but that is their prerogative, I suppose. It is disappointing, but it should not affect the way that we do business. But it should not affect the way that we do business. And I think it's for Wodonga to come to their senses and participate in this committee in the future. So restructuring our process because of recalcitrance on the part of Wodonga is not good governance and is not the way forward. The way forward is to continue with our normal practice and expand this and get on with the important work of identifying the feasibility of a regional indoor aquatic facility. Now, I don't intend to go through the whole history and my role and my position in the history of this matter, but I want to make very clear of what my position is on this matter. Albury needs an indoor regional aquatic facility. So does Wodonga. The region needs it. And I believe the only sustainable way to fund it and to construct it, and most importantly, to afford to maintain it and run it, is to do it in cooperation with the City of Wodonga and hopefully even input from other outlying regional councils. And of course, the other two tiers of government, the state and federal government. This committee will have as its core purpose, or one of its core purposes, progressing that agenda. And I think it is inevitable that common sense must prevail in Wodonga. And hopefully, if this amendment becomes the motion and we adopt the motion, that, or if this...
It is the motion.
Sorry, if this motion is adopted, that Wodonga will come to their senses and participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. There appears to be a question from Councillor King. Councillor King.
Yes, to the relevant member of staff. I'm not sure the motion from Wodonga Council was that they didn't participate in negotiations. Was that from the councillors or was that from the whole of the operational staff as well?
Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr Mayor. The response was from Wodonga City Council, so the council resolved not to participate in the suggested model here previously.
Councillor King, any follow-up?
So from that, the council have directed that no staff at all from Wodonga would participate any advisory committee? Just for clarification myself.
Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr Mayor. That's correct. In terms of this model, the recommendation in the report, of course, was based on a different model to which the City of Wodonga staff were able to participate.
Councillor King, follow up.
Sorry. So were the City of Wodonga involved in the development of this model?
Mr Zachnich.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that's the case, Councillor King.
Follow up, Councillor King, you finished?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Thank you. Speaker for, Councillor Vanderman. No speakers against at this point.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I believe that the substance of Councillor Cameron's motion encompasses a lot of the intent of the original motion. My concern with the original motion was the fact that the group was proposed to consist of only staff from both councils who would then feed into the two cities, one community working party. And as there are probably a couple of councillors involved from both Wodonga and Albury, I felt that the councillor representation on any recommendations to the two cities, one community working party was too small. So I'm happy to support this and obviously encourage the Wodonga Council to have a rethink about their participation in this, because I think it's critical, as Councillor Cameron mentioned, to have the input from Wodonga councillors about their desire to have an indoor aquatic facility in the region. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Cameron, do you have a question?
I do, through you, Mr Mayor, the most appropriate member of staff. If this motion is adopted, as I hope it will be, would council then not have to nominate a councillor or councillors to serve on that committee? As I raise this because Councillor Glacken has made us aware of her interest in the area.
Mr Zachnich.
Yes, that'll be the next step through Mr Mayor, and those committees again are up for review each September, so we could include that in the process or do it should this motion be adopted by the council.
Thank you. Just in relation to the syntax of the words, looking at the motion, it mentions cross-border advisory committee at the start. It mentions cross-border advisory aquatics facility advisory committee as point 1, but then it says the committee should be called the Albury Aquatic Facilities Advisory Committee. Is that a little bit confusing, or, I mean, that references just Albury versus cross-border? Which one is it, do you think? Councillor Cameron, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I have a view, Mr Mayor, and my view is that Wodonga have forced us into this nomenclature by their recalcitrance. If they had done what they should have done, it would be easy to call it the cross-border committee, but we can't, in all practicality, call it a cross-border committee or an Albury-Wodonga committee when Wodonga are refusing to participate. So, unfortunately, that's the conundrum that we have. Hopefully, in the future, Wodonga will come to their senses and will rename the committee.
Excellent. There are no further questions or debate. Councillor Cameron, while you're at it, did you wish to close debate?
No, I'm good, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 13.5, Aquatics Facilities Licence Model Consultation. Councillor Vanderman.
I needed to come up on the board. I've got issues with my... Thank you. I'll move the recommendation of the motion that Council A, receive and note the report, B, endorse the Aquatics Facilities Monthly Licence Usage Model, and C, note the incentivised licence fee model to be implemented from 1 July 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, I have a question from Councillor Cameron. Happy for me to take it if we open debate? Councillor Cameron, question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff. Can staff assure council that this recommendation is supported by the swimming clubs and the water polo clubs and the other user groups.
Ms Cade.
Thank you for the question through you, Mr Mayor. Aligned Leisure has been in consultation with the Aquatics Action Group. We've had several meetings which have been facilitated by AlburyCity. They've been very productive discussions, and the Aquatics Action Group is relatively comfortable with the concept, and it's about working through the operational matters, but it has been a very constructive and consultative process.
Councillor Cameron.
Relatively comfortable is a subjective analysis, I would suggest. Is it possible to say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being fully supportive and 1 being utterly opposed, how would you calculate their level of support?
Ms Cade.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you for the question. I don't think I can speak on behalf of the Aquatics Action Group, but to say that they have worked with us, they're working with Aligned Leisure, and I believe it's been a good process, and they are committed to finding a resolution which will be in the benefit of all swimmers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman, we should open debate on this item, thanks.
Yeah, this has been a fair while in gestation coming to this particular point, and I acknowledge the work of the council staff from both Wodonga and Albury, and all of the user groups and Aligned Leisure in trying to get a resolution to this particular issue. I think my take on this whole thing is that I think that there was some obviously some misunderstandings right from the very get-go around what was being charged to the user groups, and once that was out on the table, that created all of the, if you like, the controversy around what was being proposed. I think that this particular model that has been proposed, which I've moved, is fair and equitable. It gets the users to pay what would be a fair share of or a fair price for admission to and the setting aside of the pool facilities for their use during the time that they need to use it. So I'm having followed this through right from the very start, probably started pretty close to 12 months ago now, or maybe a little less, but around 12 months ago. And it's been, I suppose, a particularly stressful time for staff and for user groups and for Aligned Leisure, who, won the contract probably about 15 or 16 months ago. So hopefully that we can put this issue to bed, everybody gets on and uses the facility, and everybody is 90% happy with the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Con speaking for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, to acknowledge those in the gallery tonight that are obviously interested in this issue, and probably those watching online as well, and to thank you for your ongoing participation. Look, this issue's been fraught for a long time, and I don't need to summarise the history. It was good to see that significant consultation has finally happened, both with the survey that was done, the unofficial survey that was done, whose results we also saw, and the 3 formal meetings that were had with the action group, the minutes of which we all received. The licence model that was supported in principle pending that consultation is now in its 3rd iteration. So there was a first model proposed by Aligned Leisure, there was another model proposed by the action group, and I understand we're now at our 3rd iteration, whereby the clubs can reduce their lane hire fee down to even 0 if they increase the membership rate of their members, which seems both fair and collaborative to me. So I'm happy to support this final version, noting that the operational detail will still be sorted out, and I hope that this level of consultation will continue.
Thank you, Councillor Con. There being no further questions or speakers for or against. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 13.6 Sanded Lane Drainage Construction Contract. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council accepts the tender from Longford Civil Proprietary Limited for contract number 19/03546, Enid Lane Construction, in the lump sum amount of $162,450.75, including GST.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's an operational matter to fix up a small matter of drainage in Enid Lane, which runs parallel to Pemberton Street.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. I was surprised when reading this report that the budget allocation for the project was $330,000 and the likely successful tender comes in at about half that, $160,000. In light of recent issues with getting jobs done and being able to pay for them, am I able to be given an explanation as to why Council's staff's estimate of the budget was double what the successful tender is likely to be?
Mr Ferris.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, just looking at the assessment and reviewing that all prices except one were below our budget. So our unit rates are based on our historic contract prices, so our average contract price of recent times. Looking at Enid Lane, it's relatively easier project than the standard road reconstruction we do. So our unit rates may have been, well, were higher than what it may cost in this project. In particular, it's a laneway, so there's no real access issues. It's all a secondary access to most properties. And the other notable issue with this contract is that we had some really competitive, so we had 7 tenderers, really competitive, and looking through the current commitments of all of them, the current commitments are really low. We're finding that with our contracts at the moment, that there's plenty of competition and we're receiving really competitive prices.
Councillor, that Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Further to our issues with subcontractors working on council jobs, can the relevant member of staff give me an update on what improvements his department has made to ensure that those payments made to people winning council contractors, that the subcontractor has filled out the statutory declaration correctly, and what further steps have we taken to ensure that that stat dec is true and correct?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, contractually, we have a contract with the head contractor. We're not privy to or involved in the engagement of the subcontractors. As part of our contract documentation, a stat dec is provided with every progress payment. If that's disputed by the subcontractor, then we assist them through the Security of Payments Act, which they initiate at the time. As per previous discussions, the subcontractor is under contract with the head contractor, not with council, and we shouldn't interfere with that relationship.
Councillor Vanderman, you have a question?
On the same subject, and maybe this isn't the right forum for this particular question, but it has been raised by Councillor King. So we're relying on the fact that a statutory declaration is one that's signed in front of a Justice of the Peace, and that there are some serious penalties that if you make a false declaration in front of a Justice of the Peace, that there are some serious ramifications. Now, is there a way that we can, in our contracts, can we ask the main contractor for a list of subcontractors who we could then write to and say, are you prepared to sign a stat dec to say that you've been paid all that you're owed, rather than the main contractor sending us a stat dec to say he has paid them all, because obviously in one particular instance that hasn't been the case.
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, certainly we currently do that. So when we're contacted directly by subcontractors, we ask them to complete a stat dec. If there's a conflict between the two, we can certainly report the head contractor to Fair Trade to deal with that. Typically, contract law doesn't allow us to withhold payments without it going through the security of payments process. So the subcontractor would need to go through the security of payments process, where they could then ask for us to hold any future payments with regards to subcontractors. So that's typically how contractually it operates.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, did you have a follow-up?
Look, I think I'd like to flag that at some stage we probably need to have a workshop around this particular issue to see whether we can't come up with a more a robust method of ensuring that our the subcontractors in our community get fairly dealt with by main contractors.
And that is probably the intention. We have a confidential item tonight to discuss DPAN, and I think the long-term objective is to ensure that we have a workshop to work our way through that, because we don't want to see a repeat of what's happened.
Absolutely. Thank you.
As best as we can. Councillor King, you have a question?
Yeah, mine was a follow-up to my last question.
Yep.
I think this is the 10th time that I've asked Mr Ferris about the payment to subcontractors, and each time he gives me the same answer. Now, this is before we had our debacle with the Lavington Sports Ground redevelopment, and this is a simple contract. It's $160,000, and it appears to me that nothing has changed. Now, I don't work for the Albury City Council, but I have contracts with other government departments, and I have to fill out the stat dec, and I have to name all of my subcontractors, their addresses and their phone numbers, and they ring up and check. Now, I've said this to Mr Ferris 20 times. Write a stat dec, put who your subcontractors are, what their phone numbers are, give one of the admin staff an hour to ring them up and say, have you been paid? Now, if that had have happened, this debacle at DPAN would never have happened.
We're talking about operational matters now.
Well,
and
change the operational way you do things, because this has caused
Councillor
hurt
King
and
was reminded
problems.
that we're having a further discussion in workshop about this item.
Well,
I don't know
I'm
why
having
you
a
need to
discussion now.
reiterate that now.
Okay, I'm having a discussion now because I'm sick to death of asking Mr Ferris about the procedures that he doesn't adopt that causes these problems time and
Councillor King, this is an operational matter. You cannot discuss it in this chamber. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Thurley, there are no further people wishing to speak for or against. Do you wish to open debate on this item?
I think it's a routine matter of engineering contract in a relatively minor amount of money.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. 13.7, the DA for 10.2019.365757.1 20 Ceres Drive. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B, grant development consent to development application 10.2019.36757.1 for an industrial building, administration offices, car parking and signage at Lot 2 in DP 12467889, addressed as 20 Ceres Drive, Thurgoona, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included in this report as attachment 3, and with the additional condition A12. This development consent relates to the proposed industrial building, associated office, related car parking, landscaping, perimeter fencing and signage as shown on the approved plans only. A separate development application is to be submitted to Albury City for the future building indicated on the plans to the east of the approved development. No hard stand areas are to be constructed east of the proposed cyclone wire fence, and the area to be is left in its natural state and is not to be disturbed except where required for service connection to the approved development, unless and until a future development consent is obtained for that part of the site.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, do you wish to open debate? Thanks.
I'll look only briefly to explain the amendment. If councillors read their emails, which I'm not confident we all do, there's been a number of developments in Thurgoona where the site's been cleared well in advance of anything being built on that part of the site, and that's resulted in some significant soil and erosion issues. This is, in my mind, a similar development where they want to build on half the site. And there's a proposed building to the east, but the DA is allowing them to clear vegetation from the whole site. The amendment is giving them permission to clear the part of the site that they're currently building on, and will make sure that the other half of the site retains its vegetation for soil and erosion control purposes until they're actually ready to build on that part of the site, and then that'll be another application.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I wish also to speak in favour of this because too often there seems to be a creeping development. That is, we apply for one thing but little extra bits get added on the sides. This amendment doesn't prevent the development. In fact, it says straight out this development is a good one and can proceed. But we don't want you to assume that any future things can happen and therefore start to clear and start to get ready before you've submitted the next application, and tell us exactly what it is you want to do.
Thank you. There appears to be no further questions or debate. Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate on that item?
No, thanks.
Happy to put the motion in division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. The matter is carried. Thank you. Motion carried. Okay. Sam 14.1, disclosure by designated person return. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vandervan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendation that council receive and note the report concerning the disclosure of returns by newly appointed designated persons.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to open debate on that item?
No, I don't, Mr Mayor.
No further questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 14.2, the New South Wales Auditor General's Report on Local Government 2018. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council receive and note the New South Wales Auditor General's Report on Local Government 2018.
Thank you. Seconded, please. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, you wish to note to speak to that motion?
Simply to note that AlburyCity Council was very favourably reported on in the Auditor General's report.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. There are no delegates' reports for noting. I've been made aware of a number of items for notice of urgent business. Councillor Thurley, I think, was first off the rank.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just have two matters. Yesterday, it wasn't the best day to do this, but I spent several hours at the Victorian Country Soccer Championships. At one stage, they were delayed due to lightning and storms. However, I wanted to note that there were 61 teams present. That's more than 800 players, about 2,000 people, including parents. It seemed to be a great competition, but what I really wanted to report back to council was the compliments came from all of the players, coaches and others about the state of especially Gelbart Park. They said the grounds, the turf was terrific and they really enjoyed coming here. My understanding is that this association will try to get this event back again in the future, but it seemed to be a very successful event and well worthwhile. It obviously put a lot of money into our economy. The second matter I'd just like to raise is that I would really like this council to acknowledge the honours bestowed on two of our citizens in the Queen's Birthday Honours. The first one was Lorraine Crawford, who was given an Order of Australia Medal for her contribution to women's basketball, as a player administrator for nearly 5 decades. A lot of dedication and something that helped young women in sport. And the other one was Eliza Alt-Connell, who was made a member of the Order of Australia. She's an international medalist in wheelchair racing. But the thing that I think is most important is her strong advocacy for meningococcal disease, vaccination and so on. This is a person who suffered the consequences of meningococcal. It hasn't prevented her from going on and achieving wonderful things in her life, and I think we should note the contribution of these two people in our community.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. So noted, and I think we would all be in agreement with those thoughts. And Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity to raise the issue. You're probably all aware of the fact that the New South Wales Government recently imposed on councils an extra charge for extra workers' compensation premiums for firefighters, volunteer firefighters. This was another effort at cost shifting, and I think that there are some moves already in place by the Association of Local Government in New South Wales to get the minister involved to pay for the first 12 months of this particular impost. I raised the issue. Obviously, it does impact on AlburyCity Council's finances post our budget deliberation. We've already got to make now a $97,000, or I think it is $97,000 adjustment to our budget, because this is something that we didn't know about until just very recently. And whilst it's a significant amount for us in terms of our overall budget, it is a small amount. My issue is that smaller regional councils are faced with imposts of $45,000. I think that's out at Narandra. I think Greater Hume also had an impost of about nearly $100,000 for this particular increase in charges around volunteer fighters' workers' compensation, and I think that it's part of the government's cost shifting, and I think we need to make strong representations both through you and through our council to the New South Wales government to get them to fund this out of their revenue rather than council's revenues.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderven. There was an email from Peter Primrose to say that the motion was passed.
That's in the upper house, I believe.
So
that's only in the upper house at this stage. I did send him an email to say well done, but that's only in the upper house. So that's just making a recommendation back to the lower house to see what they can do. But it's at the moment it's only a feel-good upper house motion rather than action on the ground in the lower house.
Yeah, the recent joint organisations meeting in Sydney, it was raised with the local government minister as an item of importance because of those issues you raised, because of the late nature and the lack of notification and the impact it has on budgets for the smaller councils more so than the larger councils, but every bit counts. So thank you. So noted. Okay, thank you, councillors. We now have confidential matters, and I need someone to move those. Thanks. Councillor Cameron.
I move that we enter into confidential, Council, to discuss items CM 17.1 and CM 17.2, as these are confidential items exclusive of the press or public, on the grounds that CM 17.1(2), the matters of information are the following. D, commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, Roman numeral 1, prejudice the commercial position of that person who supplied it, and G, advice concerning litigation or advice that would otherwise be privileged from production in legal proceedings on the grounds of legal professional privilege, Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A, brackets 2, close brackets, open brackets, D-I, close brackets, open brackets, G, close brackets, CM 17.2, 2. The matters and information are the following. C, information that would, if disclosed, confer a commercial advantage on a person with whom the council is conducting or proposes to conduct business. Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A, open brackets 2, close brackets, open brackets C, close brackets.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Second, Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
I now ask anyone who may be in the body of the council chamber if they have any statements or submissions regarding the reasons identified by the council in the confidential item 17.1 and 17.2. There are no submissions. Happy to put that. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We'll now seal the doors. Thank you, councillors.
Parcel of roads, Weatherall, the criminal, and Wodonga. Already. Did we adopt that code of practice or what? Now you know what. You did. Only to the degree necessary.
Thank you, councillors.
Go back to your hat.
I just wish to confirm that we're moving back into open council at 7:38 PM. In the closed council, we had CM 17.1. It was moved by councillor Thurley. No, councillor Vanderman, second by councillor Cameron. And the motion was that council further consider payment to subcontractors involved in the Lavington Sports Ground redevelopment project outside of the Deepan Group Proprietary Limited contract and post-liquidation. The motion was put and carried. 17.2, Strategic Land Acquisition Riverside Experience Update, moved by councillor Thurley, seconded by councillor Cameron. The council receive and note the report. The motion was put and carried. That completes our council business. Meeting closed at 7:39. Thank you.